When Princess Anne stood before the press at Windsor, few expected her calm, steady voice to ignite a royal earthquake. With one simple sentence, she shattered months of silence and speculation. The Princess of Wales will now represent the crown on the international stage. It wasn't just a promotion, it was a transfer of power. And behind Anne's composed delivery, insiders whispered of tension, secrecy, and a carefully orchestrated palace coup. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The announcement landed like a thunderclap. For decades, Anne had been known as the monarchy's steadiest hand, disciplined, discreet, and unshakably loyal to duty. So when she became the messenger of a declaration that shifted the very foundation of royal influence, the question burned through every corridor. Why Anne? Why now? Senior courtiers were blindsided. Even foreign envoys, many of whom had spent 2 years cultivating ties with Charles and Camilla, were caught off guard. The world had barely adjusted to King Charles's evolving reign, and yet here was a move that rewrote the hierarchy without a hint of warning. Within minutes, the global media storm erupted. Headlines screamed of a palace power shift. Commentators called it the most unexpected royal shakeup since Charles's coronation. But beneath the noise, something more deliberate was unfolding. This was not a random gesture of royal goodwill. It was strategic, calculated, down to the moment Anne chose to deliver it. Sources close to the palace described months of private meetings, late-night calls, and untraceable memos exchanged between Windsor and Kensington. This wasn't about symbolism. It was about survival. For years, the monarchy had faced mounting pressure. Public trust was fragile, global relevance waning, and internal divisions quietly widening behind the scenes. Princess Anne had watched it all unfold from a vantage few could match. She had seen the cracks in the family's public unity, the friction between old traditions and modern expectations. And in Catherine, she saw something the monarchy desperately needed: discipline without coldness, elegance without excess, and an instinct for diplomacy that seemed almost inherited. While others performed for the cameras, Catherine strategized. While others demanded loyalty, she earned it. Those closest to Anne knew she had been preparing this moment for longer than anyone realized. She had quietly withdrawn from certain ceremonial roles, begun advising key aides, and most tellingly, refused to let the palace's communication department interfere with the Windsor press event. That alone spoke volumes. The king hadn't made the announcement. Neither had the Prince of Wales. Anne had. And that, to royal insiders, was the most revealing sign of all. Some said it was Charles's trust in his sister that gave her the stage. Others whispered,
there was no performance, no vanity, just resolve. In Catherine, Anne saw not just grace, but strategy. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine the institution's survival beyond the chaos of succession and scandal. Their connection deepened over the years in whispers and brief exchanges, moments unnoticed by the cameras, but remembered by those who served them. On state tours, while others retreated to comfort, Anne and Catherine lingered after official engagements, speaking in low tones about the world beyond the palace gates. Catherine often asked about Anne's years navigating royal diplomacy, how she balanced truth with loyalty and conviction with duty. Anne, ever pragmatic, warned her that modern admiration was fickle, that the same public who praised could destroy with a single headline. Still, she saw in Catherine a resilience that refused to bend. By then, Anne's disillusionment with Camilla's growing influence had already taken root. To Anne, Camilla represented a version of monarchy that had lost its discipline, a structure too easily swayed by optics and personal indulgence. The crown, Anne believed, had become reactive rather than principled. And so she began to confide in Catherine slowly, deliberately, not in rebellion, but in hope. She spoke of legacy, of preserving the moral spine of the monarchy, and Catherine listened not as a subordinate, but as an equal who shared her fears for what the family was becoming. What began as counsel turned into a quiet understanding. The two women began to move in subtle synchrony, aligning their public demeanor, their statements, their silences. They learned the art of timing, when to step forward, when to hold back. Together, they softened the edges of an institution that was hardening against the world. When Anne faced resistance within the palace, Catherine stood beside her with unwavering composure. When Catherine's compassion was dismissed as naivety, Anne defended her, reminding skeptics that empathy was not weakness. It was the monarchy's last bridge to its people. Over time, this bond grew into what those close to them would later call a silent pact. It was never written, never spoken aloud, yet everyone in the inner circle felt its presence. A pact to protect the institution from itself, to preserve its dignity when politics and personal ambition threatened to unravel it. They were not just allies, they were guardians, and their unity, though discreet, was unshakable. But the deeper their bond grew, the more it began to unsettle the old order. Those who had long controlled the palace's narrative sensed a shift they could not manipulate. Power was changing hands, not through decree, but through trust. And soon, that quiet loyalty would ignite the very confrontation both women had tried to prevent. For months, whispers echoed through the royal corridors. Camilla was not pleased. The queen consort, long accustomed to subtle control and quiet influence, had begun to feel her grip slipping. What the public saw as polished unity between the senior royals was in truth a delicate mask hiding a fierce struggle for dominance. Beneath the polished veneer of handshakes and smiling photographs, a cold war was brewing. Camilla's decades of quiet maneuvering had met their match in the unlikely alliance of two women she had underestimated, Anne and Catherine. Tensions began as whispers but quickly evolved into fractures. Those within Clarence's house noticed the change first. Camilla's once tight-knit communications team grew restless, their tone shifting from composed confidence to quiet defensiveness. Leaks started to appear in the press, carefully timed, delicately worded, but unmistakably targeted. Stories hinting that Catherine was overstepping her bounds, that her influence was unofficial and unearned, began trickling into tabloids notorious for protecting royal insiders. The message was subtle, but sharp. Catherine's rise was not sanctioned by the queen consort. Inside Kensington Palace, the mood turned guarded. Catherine's team, trained in diplomacy and discretion, refused to respond publicly, but behind the scenes they were preparing for a storm. Every statement was reviewed twice, every engagement carefully balanced to project strength without defiance. And through it all, Anne watched. She had seen these power plays before, whispers used as weapons, reputations twisted in the press. But this time, Anne refused to stand by in silence. Her loyalty to Catherine was not sentimental, it was strategic. Anne understood that public trust had shifted. The people admired Catherine's composure, her grounded image, her ability to modernize the monarchy without dismantling it. Foreign ambassadors who once turned to Camilla for insight now sought Catherine's counsel. Her reputation abroad grew quietly, but powerfully. Her words carried the weight of calm authority that no palace press office could manufacture. When dignitaries spoke of the monarchy's future, they spoke of Catherine, not Camilla. And that, more than any headline, enraged the queen consort. As the divide widened, the battle lines within the royal household became impossible to ignore. Clarence House and Kensington Palace began operating almost as rival courts. Messages went unanswered. Invitations were lost. Joint appearances were cancelled under the guise of scheduling conflicts. To outsiders, it seemed routine. To insiders, it was sabotage. One aide reportedly confessed that you could feel the frost every time their names were mentioned in the same room. The monarchy's internal order, so dependent on unity and hierarchy, was quietly unraveling. Then came Anne's intervention. She knew that silence only fed speculation, and that division, if left unchecked, would corrode everything the monarchy represented. Against the advice of senior aides, Anne took control. She appeared beside Catherine at key events, her body language unmistakably protective. During private briefings, she praised Catherine's professionalism, ensuring the message spread through diplomatic channels before it ever reached the press. In her steady, measured way, Anne had made her choice, and in doing so, she had drawn a line that could not be ignored. The effect was immediate. The queen consort's circle, once powerful and untouchable, began to falter under public scrutiny. Every whisper of manipulation, every rumored slight now pointed back to Camilla's shadow. Anne's decision to side with Catherine wasn't just an act of solidarity. It was an assertion of authority, a reminder that true power within the royal family didn't always come with a crown. And as Camilla's influence waned, the stage was set for something unthinkable. A new voice to represent the crown, and a royal order Anne herself would enforce. It was never meant to leak. The closed-door meeting at Balmoral had been arranged quietly, away from the press and the staff who might listen at doors. Only 4 people were present: Charles, Camilla, Anne, and Catherine. On the surface, it was framed as a discussion about international representation and the monarchy's future abroad. But those who later heard fragments of what happened that night described something far deeper, far more personal. What began as a policy talk turned into an emotional standoff that would permanently alter the balance of royal power. Anne was the first to speak. She had come prepared, her arguments laid out like military precision. For months, she had watched the monarchy's credibility weaken under internal politics and external scrutiny. She told them plainly that if the monarchy wanted to remain relevant beyond Britain's shores, it needed a representative who could command both trust and admiration, a figure the world saw as steady, empathetic, and intelligent. That, she argued, was not Camilla, and not even Charles. It was Catherine. Her tone was calm, but her conviction was unmistakable. The monarchy, Anne said, could not afford another decade of public missteps and defensive headlines. It needed a voice the world respected, and Catherine had already proven herself to be that voice. Charles listened, shifting uneasily. His hesitation was visible. The idea of elevating Catherine, his daughter-in-law, beyond ceremonial duties was politically dangerous. He worried about how the Commonwealth would interpret it, how foreign allies would react to what might look like a rebranding of royal diplomacy. "It will be seen as favoritism," he reportedly murmured, "or worse, as weakness." Anne countered immediately, her words sharp but steady. "Weakness is pretending nothing needs."
Princess Anne appeared before cameras at Windsor. The air was already charged with tension. Journalists,
armed with half-truths and pointed questions, tried to corner her into confirming what they already suspected. But Anne, seasoned in the art of composure, did not flinch. Her words were calm, deliberate, and final. The Princess of Wales will represent the Crown on matters of international diplomacy. That single confirmation cut through the noise like a blade. The speculation ended, but the damage was done. The palace's unity had been compromised, and the world had seen it. Through it all, Catherine remained silent. No statements, no smiles for the cameras, no comment from her staff. Her silence became the story. To the public, it read as grace under pressure. To insiders, it was strategy, an understanding that sometimes power speaks loudest when it says nothing at all. Behind the scenes, Anne's office ordered an immediate communications lockdown. Every department was instructed to trace the origin of the leak, though no conclusive evidence was ever found. The only thing certain was that it had come from within Buckingham Circle, and that it had been intentional. For weeks, whispers of betrayal consumed the palace. Aides were moved, access was restricted, and private calls were quietly monitored. But amid the confusion, one truth emerged stronger than any rumor. The leak, intended to destabilize Anne's plan, had done the opposite. It had forced the world to pay attention. What began as scandal had become spectacle, and Catherine, though silent, now stood at the center of global curiosity. And yet, while the world obsessed over leaks and motives, something much deeper was already in motion. A new power alignment that would reshape the monarchy's entire global strategy. When Catherine stepped into the Foreign Office for her first official briefing, the air itself seemed to change. It was more than ceremony. It was a declaration. Every camera lens turned. Every diplomat's gaze lingered. Every phrase she spoke carried the weight of centuries behind it. Gone was the cautious duchess who once stood quietly behind others. What emerged that morning was a woman fully aware of her influence, fully prepared to wield it, measured, deliberate, and unshakable. Catherine wasn't stepping into history. She was rewriting it. And as she did, the old guard began to tremble. This was her debut as the newly appointed spokesperson for international affairs, an unprecedented title born from months of tension, negotiation, and quiet defiance. Few knew the battles fought behind palace walls to make it possible, and even fewer understood that Princess Anne had orchestrated every step to ensure Catherine's success. Anne knew what the monarchy had to project now: stability, intelligence, and grace under pressure. And Catherine embodied it with an ease that disarmed even the most skeptical observers. Her entrance into the Foreign Office wasn't a photo opportunity. It was a calculated move to show the world that the monarchy had found its new voice. Inside, Catherine was not merely reading statements. She was directing conversations. Ambassadors accustomed to polite royal gestures found themselves listening intently as she discussed global development, environmental policy, and diplomatic cooperation with the clarity and authority of a seasoned stateswoman. Her confidence was magnetic, her intellect disarming. When she spoke, it wasn't rehearsed. It was conviction wrapped in elegance. Those in attendance would later admit that it felt less like a royal engagement and more like a master class in leadership. The world was seeing a royal not content with pageantry, but power shaped by purpose. The response was immediate. Within hours, headlines praised her unprecedented command of global dialogue and refreshing grasp of international diplomacy. Political commentators called her approach modern monarchy in motion. Even the toughest foreign correspondents, who often dismissed royal engagements as ceremonial fluff, described Catherine's debut as substantive, strategic, and future-facing. What few realized, however, was that Anne had quietly guided every detail behind the scenes: the timing, the setting, the audience, and even the tone Catherine struck. Anne's decades of experience had paved the way, but she had deliberately stepped back, letting Catherine stand alone. It was her final act of mentorship, silent but monumental. Back at Buckingham Palace, however, the reaction was far from unanimous. Courtiers whispered that Catherine's confidence bordered on overreach. Some claimed that her growing influence was unsettling those who once dismissed her as decorative. Even among senior officials, there were murmurs of unease. "She's becoming too powerful," one aide reportedly confided. "Too beloved, too untouchable." Yet no one dared confront her directly. In public, Catherine was untarnished perfection. In private, she was becoming the figure Anne had envisioned, a modern royal capable of commanding respect without demanding it. Through it all, William stood proudly yet cautiously. He admired her wife's evolution, but understood the danger that came with such visibility. The higher she rose, the more she would be tested. He had seen how power changed people, and how envy destroyed them. Still, he supported her, quietly reinforcing her role with gestures that spoke louder than words. To him, Catherine's success was not just personal, it was the monarchy's redemption. By the end of that day, the world had witnessed a transformation that could not be undone. The monarchy had found its modern stateswoman, and the power dynamics within its walls had irrevocably shifted. The cameras eventually turned away, the applause faded, and the headlines would be replaced by others. But something fundamental had changed, because in that moment, beneath the applause and the polite diplomacy, Catherine had crossed a threshold. She had become the monarchy's new center of gravity. But as she rose higher, so did the stakes. And what came next would test the very unity that Anne had fought so hard to preserve. Not everyone was ready to follow. Within weeks of Anne's historic announcement, the quiet hum of dissent began to echo through the royal corridors. What had begun as a moment of modern unity soon unraveled into something raw, personal, and dangerous. The extended family, used to carefully choreographed order, found themselves grappling with a new reality. A monarchy no longer defined by bloodline alone, but by capability. This wasn't Catherine's coronation, but it might as well have been. Those words would capture the mood of a family divided, resentful, uncertain, and quietly imploding. Princess Beatrice and Eugenia, though publicly silent, were said to have taken the news with mixed feelings. Both had long dreamed of earning greater recognition within the institution, only to watch the spotlight shift entirely to Catherine. Their polite smiles at public events couldn't mask the quiet hurt of being sidelined once again. Edward, ever diplomatic, tried to mediate tensions behind the scenes, urging calm and perspective. Yet even he could not deny that the tone inside the palace had changed. Doors closed more quickly. Conversations ended abruptly. Once friendly gatherings now carried an unspoken tension, the kind that made every word sound like a test of loyalty. At the center of it all stood King Charles, torn between love, duty, and fear. His decision to allow Anne's plan seemed prudent at first, but the fallout left him questioning everything. On one side stood Camilla, wounded by what she saw as a deliberate humiliation. On the other, Anne and Catherine, whose combined influence had now surpassed anything he anticipated. Charles found himself balancing on the thinnest of ropes, trying to maintain the image of unity while privately struggling to contain the cracks spreading through his family. For the first time in his reign, he was not the uncontested voice of authority. The throne may have been his, but the world's attention and loyalty was shifting elsewhere. Then came the leaks. Whispered fragments of private family conversations began appearing in the press. Phrases taken out of context, but potent enough to ignite headlines. A supposed argument between Charles and Anne. A report claiming Camilla had withdrawn from certain duties in protest. Whether true or not, each story added fuel to a growing perception that the monarchy was once again at war with itself. The public, however, seemed